Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Right to Read initiative. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and today I am so happy to have Dr. Shelley Blackwell join me again. And today we're going to be discussing the implementation science. And this is something that really excites me because I think it's important and something that's not spoken about enough. Right? We see all these different interventions and programs, and you hear it works or it's not working. And I've seen really great programs that are designed really well, but after an 8-hour Pro-D, a teacher can't use it how it's designed to be used. And so they're saying, oh yeah, there's something wrong with the program. And then I've seen other programs that aren't very good, but because of how the teacher is using it and their knowledge, they're able to adapt the materials to use it fairly effectively.
Yeah, and I didn't really know about implementation science in a deep way until I was in my doctorate program, and we had one whole course dedicated to implementation science. And it was really fascinating to me. And at that time, it was kind of an up and coming term in my field in speech language pathology and in education. Healthcare system's been using it for a while, but they've really been looking at that research about how what exactly causes something to work and something not to work, and how do we make those decisions, and how do we prepare our systems for those things. So it was really fascinating to me, and as I took the class, I was reflecting on the couple decades I've been with my school district, and thinking in terms of that, and framing it in what are things that we've done as a district that have worked well and why, and what are things we've done in the district that didn't really work and why. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right, there's so many different layers. And the other piece that I realized was it depends upon the district, the school, and the classroom. I mean, the implementation levels or actions for each of those things can vary. So it's not just if it's implemented at the district level, well, that's not a guarantee that it's going to trickle down into the classroom. So it's really a pretty deep topic and fun to talk about.
It is. And, it's something that, as you said, is in other fields and expected and accepted. But, in the teaching profession where things are, at least where I am, it's all about teacher autonomy. But I think we also need to consider teacher accountability, right? We're holding our students to various accountabilities for their learning, but we need to make sure that teachers are being held accountable for covering the material that is expected in the most efficacious way.
Yeah. Well, and, thinking about what hasn't worked in our district, whether it's gen ed or sped or district wide, it's that model of come to the training, come to your professional learning session, learn all about it, get trained, quote unquote, on this new initiative or new product or whatever, and then good luck. And it's never been a malicious kind of thing, like we're going to set them up to fail. It's never been intentional like that. It's been, we don't have the time. We didn't have the manpower to provide the support. We didn't have the professional development days enough built in to our school district year to give them that ongoing training. And so it was kind of a one and done, and realizing then that some teachers make it work and some teachers don't. And then they say, well, this doesn't work. But there are lots of things we need to think about. And that's where the implementation science comes in. We can't just have an idea and say, go do it. Good luck. There's a lot more to it. And that's the piece that I really learned about in my class.
Well, I think it's also, if we're thinking logically, we don't expect to give our students like an intensive, lesson on something and expect them to understand and do it perfectly the next day.
Right.
So, yes, teachers are professionals, and, as an adult, you have a better capacity for things, but it's still not necessarily that you're going to have everything mastered by that one day of training.
Even as
And all the pull-out sessions, and like, it's not like you're solid sitting there. There's also the fact that when you actually use the program, right, and go deeper into the program, not just that sales pitch for it, your understanding may change and you may have questions that arise.
well, and that also goes to the part about take the training aside or out of it. We have to make sure we're using that new initiative or new product with fidelity. And so if I'm given a manual and say, go do it, I may go, well, especially if we're talking about explicit systematic phonics instruction, that has to be done a certain way. You can't just pick and choose and go, this lesson doesn't look very good, or so I'm going to skip that, or math, you can't skip a lesson. It's built upon. So we have to make sure that teachers understand it well enough to know the structure of it and the content of it, and to implement it with fidelity. And I think that phrase gets used a lot lately, and may make some people cringe, like, I don't want to hear that again. But there's also very much truth to it. If we don't do it the way it's supposed to be done, it's not going to work the way they say it's going to work. And in the experiments and the studies that are done through our researchers, they set things up in a very structured way and say, here are the results we got with these conditions. And with this, I mean, they list out their methods and everything. And so they set up the program with the understanding that you'll get these results if you do it this way. I think some of the difficulty then is from research to practice, that we can't always replicate the scenario that is in the research study. And so then some of the efficacy gets lost because we aren't doing it the way that they say we need to do it. But that's also part of, I think, our job as support specialists to say, okay, how can we take this research and make it relevant and effective in the classroom setting or in the field? Because sometimes those research studies end up being a little sterile with this is great, but it's not real life. There's no classroom that looks like this.
Very true. And the other thing that I think is important to recognize is there's a lot of great programs out there. I mean, I myself have courses, and with my courses, I provide worksheets and activities that I say would be great for teachers to use with the programs. But they can't just take and print it off and kind of go by what they sort of remember on how to use it. There is a specific way to use the activities. And if you're using it wrong, you're not going to get the desired results.
Yeah.
I've seen this with so many programs. They, sprinkle a little in here, sprinkle a little bit in there, and it's not being used correctly or appropriately. And the way it is being used isn't best practice.
Right.
Yeah, so that's difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's where then our leaders have to, or whoever's above those people, have to really look at the way that we are implementing. So when we have a new initiative, when we have a new process, a new product, something that we're using that's new, we have to really go through the steps that implementation science has shown us. We have to explore the admin explores all the ideas and says, what do we need? What are we showing a need for? What are we going to use to address that need? Go through all of those processes of what are we going to adopt, and is it aligned with the evidence, and does it fit the needs of our students? And instead of just saying materials are dropped at your school, we'll have a 4-hour training, good luck, there are more steps to it. And without that kind of guidance, it doesn't matter how much money you spend or how amazing the program is, it's not going to work. In fact, there's research that says without implementation teams, so coaches, support specialists, ongoing training, without those types of things, it takes 17 years to move half of an intended initiative into regular practice. 17 years just to move half the people. So it's just showing up and dropping off of your materials is not going to be enough. And I can really speak to that because in this job that I am as an MTSS support specialist, last school year, we adopted a new core phonics program and a new MTSS intervention program for literacy. And in previous years, initiatives, we have said, here's your materials, here's your training. We'll kind of give you some emails to support you along the way. With this initiative, the administration hired a team. And so we go into buildings weekly and we are meeting with teams and PLCs, and we're going through the data and we're looking at what are your hiccups, what are the obstacles, what are you running into? Can I come model a lesson? Can I watch you and can we have a coaching session? And so we are there to support them along the way, which has been a key to the success that our district has had in implementing this. And they went through the process. They went through, we're kind of in the initial implementation stage still. We've got some kinks to work out, and some teams are off and running, some teams are struggling, which is right where we need to be. And we're where you would expect to be. And we're not in full implementation yet, where we're doing it with fidelity and consistency. We're still learning it.
Mm-hmm.
But being year two, actually 1.5 into it, we would not be at the same point without the humans, the manpower to support them and their implementation of it, and clarifying what to do, and not just about the product and the process, but giving them that teacher education, teacher knowledge that we've talked about before, about the science of reading, about how to look at data, about the process of becoming a skilled reader. And without those conversations, we would be in that probably 17-year stretch of going, okay, we've got this stuff, but it's not working. It's not working.
Well, and if you think about it, like I didn't have a long time in the classroom, but I did have some time. And I remember like, okay, so this is the next lesson in math. We'll do it tomorrow, right? Like just working through the textbook.
Right.
And, as starting out, I was everywhere. Let's be honest, right? Like I knew math, I knew it well. But I didn't take the time to really study how the textbook had it laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going based off of my knowledge, which was deep. Like I'm very comfortable with, I was in a grade 3-4 classroom. I'm very comfortable with grade 3-4 math, especially when it comes to addition and subtraction. So, but when we're looking at other things, especially when it comes to using new programs aligned with evidence-based best practices, the science of reading, structured literacy,
mm-hmm.
It's important that you don't just take it and look at it, 5 minutes before the lesson, like, okay, this is what we're doing, if you don't have that knowledge. Right. I know something that I'm personally working on in my growth is learning more about etymology. And that's a huge dive, but
huge learning curve.
It's something that I can, pull up, etymology online and say, okay, so this is the origin. I understand how etymology works. I just don't have that storage bank for every word in the English language.
And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding, but I don't have it. It's not, I don't have the whole language either.
But then,
yeah, go ahead.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, some of these programs, we've heard it in Emily Hanford's podcast, Sold a Story, where these programs that have been tried and true for years are trying to tweak it here, tweak it there so that they can, fit into something, but not really. Mm-hmm. And then so you have the experts in their programs who don't have the same background and experience trying to teach this stuff that they don't fully understand. And I'm seeing this in school districts as well when they're going for professional developments. They're turning to people that are trying to make the change themselves instead of going to individuals who have spent years studying, right, reading up, understanding it. So even if they are using, a different phonics program that may follow a slightly different scope and sequence, personally, I feel pretty confident that I could pick up almost any phonics program that is aligned with the science of reading and structured literacy, having information about, the scope and sequence and how it's tying into phonemic awareness, I'm pretty confident that I could understand what's being done in the lesson and move forward.
Mhm.
I also feel confident that I could help people understand how to use that product instead of having someone that's, doesn't know their grapheme phoneme correspondences. It's important to have that support in place to say, okay, look, I'm trying to learn this and it's okay because I'm trying to learn it, but I need someone that I can go to and
Yeah.
speak, say, hey, look, I don't quite understand this. Can you talk to me?
That is exactly right. And I think that's why our initiative has been successful, because we are a point of contact. So in my 5 buildings, they can email me, they can text me at any point. In fact, sometimes I'll have a 4th grade teacher say, okay, I'm getting ready to do syllable structure with this word, but I don't understand the syllable structure. How is it supposed to be divided? So I text them right back, but we're having those conversations. And what I love is that they're becoming more curious about, what else can I learn? How do I deepen my level? One of the programs we're using does a lot of morphology, and in 4th and 5th grade. And the teachers are willing to teach it, but they've confided in us that I don't know this. So how am I supposed to teach this? But how many people, unless you're a linguist or maybe a speech pathologist, how many people really had coursework in understanding morphology? In fact, some of the teachers are like, I've never even said that word before this year. So that's another role that we can play as support specialists in the implementation of this. Because had we not been there, they would have looked at that program and gone, I don't understand this. So how am I going to teach this? It'd be like me walking into a calculus class and saying, okay, I'm going to try to teach you this. And I don't know what this is or what that means. So it's very unnerving. And I have to give credit to our teachers because they've been very vulnerable. And teachers don't like to feel vulnerable when they're doing their job because they're very passionate about it. And they're the ones who are supposed to be the quote, all knowing. So for them to confide in us and turn to us and say, can you help me understand this? And so we've also made some adjustments to the curriculum in response to what they've been finding in their classrooms and things like that. But you're absolutely right. If you don't understand it, you're not going to implement it with fidelity. You're not going to implement it with much success. But they also at some point have to learn. And so should be some space and some room and some permission to say, it's okay that you have to look this up on etymology online. It's okay that you have to Google, what does the root form mean or whatever. It's okay, because you're also modeling to your students, hey, I don't know all of these pieces in English. Not many people do. So when I don't know something, what am I going to do? A, I'm showing my vulnerability. B, I'm showing my desire to learn. C, I'm showing them how to problem solve, finding answers. And so coaching teachers to say, it's okay that you don't know the answer to this, because you're learning too, and you're modeling to that, I hope has helped their anxiety as they are in this learning curve, so that as they do it for a couple of years, they're going to become more expert at it, to be able to really dive deeper and take it to a new level.
Yeah, well, and I think it's humbling.
Yes.
Being honest with your students, saying, look, this isn't how I was taught. This isn't what I learned at teachers college, but it's what the science is saying is best for you. And it means that when you're an adult, this will just be like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody know that?
Well,
that's fine. It's just the same way that it is with technology. We didn't have iPhones when
yep.
Internet was connected to the wall.
And I think it's really powerful for students to see their teacher, who, like I said, is supposed to quote, know everything, to have some intellectual humility to say, you know what, I don't know this. I'm really good at this and I know a lot about this, but this is harder for me. So I'm going to show you what I do when it's hard, and I'm going to seek out the answer. And I know I don't know everything, but I want to learn as much as I can. And demonstrating and living that line of thinking hopefully creates lifelong learners. That just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you've got it all. Research is changing all the time. We're learning new things. You read a new book, you're like, oh, I didn't understand it that way. That makes more sense. And that's what lifelong learning is. And that's what we need to create in our students. So I want to also talk about de-implementation,
Yes.
because that was a term that I had not heard about until this course. It was like, it opened my eyes. It was amazing. It's one of those classes that you're like, yep, keep talking. I'm taking notes. Yep, go, fill, because it was just, it kind of made things make sense for me when I looked out into practice, into either in my own speech pathology practice at the time, or what was happening in my elementary school, or what was happening in my district. And in fact, I visited with our superintendent, and he's so down to earth and loves having very open and honest conversations, which is one of his best attributes as a leader. You can tell it like it is with him. And he takes it and is like, okay, well, then let's problem solve. What can we do? So he came in one day and he said, he goes, how's it going in the field? Give me your honest feedback. How's this whole thing working with your new phonics? And I said, my team, we said, it's going well. We're right where we think we need to be. We've got some hiccups, we're growing, it's moving forward though. But I said, the thing that I think our district has failed at in our time, then I was like, oh, Shelley, you probably shouldn't, like, watch your words. But I said, we don't de-implement anything. We just say, like, for instance, we used Fountas and Pinnell. And we didn't say, here's why we're not using this anymore. Here's what we're doing instead of. We didn't say, here, if these pieces we are not using, these pieces you may use. If you like the comprehension questions to help facilitate a conversation in your small group, you can use the comprehension questions, but we're not going to use the benchmark assessment system. We're not going to use the leveled readers. We're not going to say, she's a level G, you're in a level G group. We're not going to do those things. And this is why. We just said, stop doing that. And so a lot of teachers who didn't have the structured literacy background, they quote, grew up with the balanced literacy, and our reading specialists were trained in balanced literacy in the colleges. They were very perplexed, they were angry, they were confused at, like, okay, well, what now? Here, what's the new shiny thing we're doing this year? And in 3 years, we'll do another new shiny thing. And that to me is a significant failure on, like, our district or whatever company on their part, because we're not educating teachers on the thinking behind it or the research. We're just saying, stop doing this, start doing this. And as I've been able to have conversations with them to say, here's why we aren't doing this anymore, there's been some aha, and like, okay, I get that. So we haven't had those de-implementation conversations, and truly to no fault of anybody's, because if I'm just learning about this with as much as I read and study, what if they don't even know about it? What in education, we haven't talked about implementation science much until recently. So that's what maybe they thought they had to do.
Well, and there's two things that I'm thinking about that as you're discussing it. One is, I'm seeing stuff, the district that I live in is still very much heavily balanced literacy. And I'm still seeing information sent home where the first thing is looking at the pictures and asking what they think it is and what would make sense. But they do at the end tack on a couple things related to, like, looking at the letters. And good for you for looking at the letters of the words, but that should be at the top. And we shouldn't have looking at the pictures anywhere. And, when I've spoken to the higher ups, they've said, well, teachers are allowed to have several tools in their toolbox. And it's just a need for changing the conversation and saying, look, we know this doesn't work. And we need to make the changes so that our students get the best chance of success, and recognize that we've made mistakes in the past, but we didn't know it, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yep.
But now that we know better, we need to prevent those mistakes for the future generations. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention, unless you have something to say about that.
I was just going to say, you hit on one of the bullet points of when we de-implement is when something has been shown to be ineffective. That's one of them. If it's ineffective or not helpful, we need to stop doing it. If it's causing harm, we need to stop doing it. If it is no longer necessary, let's de-implement it. And it doesn't mean abandon it. It means we need to revisit this and say, do we reduce this or do we replace this? It's a very thought out process to de-implement, but that is a prime case of, something that is not as effective as they said it was going to be. First, we got to check, is it being done with fidelity? Is it supported by evidence and research? That should have been done before we implemented it. But, if it's not effective, let's consider replacing it or reducing it, whatever that might be. So you're spot on with that.
Thank you. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is we're starting to see, well, it's a lot more prevalent in the research now, that during implementation of research studies, we are looking at implementation fidelity. And in the 80s and the 90s, you didn't necessarily see it. So you'd have these studies trying a new way of instructions or new materials and whatever, and then just assume that they were being used appropriately within the classroom. I mean, it's different if you have research assistants implementing, but they still should have some fidelity assessment to make sure that what they are doing is actually what they say they're doing.
Yeah. And a lot of things will have like checklists or something. Our team is creating some look-fors that we can give our principals so that when they go and do walkthroughs in their building, how sometimes you can walk into a room and there's an amazing, engaging lesson that has nothing to do with the standards that you're supposed to be teaching. It looks cool. If you don't know what you're looking for, you're like, bravo, you were amazing. So we're creating some look-fors so the principals who haven't had the background and training that we've had can walk into a classroom and say, whether it's phonics or morphology or reading fluency or comprehension, here are the things that you need to be seeing, kind of your checklist, to say, you know what, they are implementing this with fidelity, or at least with integrity, that they're hitting the parts that need to be hit that are non-negotiable and in certain ways, so that principals can be empowered to provide some of that coaching, or at least to say to us, hey, third grade is struggling with this. Can you come to PLC and help them, coach them into some more effective practices or whatever,
Well, and the thing is, it's not to call out teachers or reprimand them or anything. It's saying, look, I think you might need a little bit of help with this. Can I help you? I understand this. I know how to do this. Let me give it a try and show you how I do it, so that you can then see it instead of just seeing the lesson, static in a book on a page. See that dynamic interaction of the concept.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, if you're going to put that much work into teaching, don't you want to get results? So there's some things that are happening or aren't happening that are keeping you from getting the results that you could get. So let me see if I can give you a few pointers or tips, or, my brain keeps going back to the driving range at a golf course. I took lessons and I'm horrible at golf. I mean, like really bad. But I think if I took one round of lessons. If I wanted to play golf, I would need a lot more, because I need somebody to show me what I'm not doing or what I'm doing wrong. My big thing is my hips swing. But unless I had somebody to say to me, if you swing your hips, if you stand up after you hit the ball, it's not going to go where you want to go. I could keep trying that and getting results, or I could have somebody who's an expert but well knowledge in that field to say, here's how you could be more successful so you can enjoy this. And that's exactly what walkthroughs and coaching sessions are about, to say, if you're going to put the work in and you're going to show up and do this, let's let's give you the best bang for your buck. Now, walkthroughs don't always feel that way. It sometimes, probably most of the time, depending upon relationships, feels like a judgment. Are they, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I good enough? Or am I going to get in trouble? Or am I not doing, it gets very anxiety provoking. But if you can have the climate and the relationship of, I can give you some tips on this to make sure that you can get the most out of your students and get that they, if you do these things. But that's boy, man, that may be a whole nother conversation about the contributing factors.
So I guess let's try and come up with a couple big takeaways from this conversation, because I know we've gone a little bit everywhere.
Yeah.
But
usually go.
We've had good ideas within it. So I think first, if we can define what implementation science is.
So it's actually it's a science. There are researchers that look at the efficacy of how things are implemented. There are tools that you can use. The hexagon tool is one. So for instance, if I was to say, hey, we need something for fluency, I might use that tool to help me make sure I'm looking at all the pieces in the stages of implementation and all the components that go with it. So there are actual tools out there, but implementation science is actually looking at what makes things work well. And by making things work well, we also learn what doesn't make things work well. And so part of those things are like, you've got to look at your organization, you've got to look at your leadership, you've got to look at your implementation drivers, which would be the people who are going to be a part of that. There's a model out there, it's a multiplicative model. So kind of like the simple view is multiplicative. You have to have effective interventions. So is this evidence-based? Is there proof that shows this works? Plus the methods. What's my procedure for providing support and training and professional learning for implementation? And there's also the context. So this is my policy and my procedure, and how am I going to communicate all those for those changes to happen? When you have all three of those things, you're more likely to have your intended outcomes. And so with implementation science definition, I would also just say it's a lot more than just picking something up and using it. There's a lot of forethought that goes into it and circumstances that have to be in place.
Yeah, and the other big thing we discussed was that de-implementation science.
Yeah.
How do we go about that?
So it's really discontinuing low value practice. So when you find something that isn't working, then you have to figure out a way to discontinue it. And I see the word abandon a lot in the research about it, but abandon, we usually think of as just leave it, but abandon means let's work our way out of it. So part of that is looking at, okay, can we reduce one thing, maybe like meetings? Okay, we're going to de-implement the amount of meetings we have. How are we going to do that? Are we going to cut down the number of meetings, the frequency of meetings? Are we going to use an agenda so that we decrease the time in our meetings? Can we reduce something to make it more effective? And then they also talk about coupling de-implementation with implementation. So perhaps that is like in our case, we're going to replace Fountas and Pinnell with our core phonics from 95% group. We're going to replace that and not just send in your old stuff, here's your new stuff, but let's talk about why we're doing this. What was it about F&P that wasn't effective and why we're moving on? And what is it that this new program has and offers that is why we want to go this way? So the de-implementation piece, I think in the field, maybe not in the research, for me has a lot more of tell me why, explain why and explain how, because that I think piece is overlooked often. It's easy to say, hey, we're no longer doing this, send that in, you're going to be checked out new stuff. That's not de-implementing, that's just replacing.
Well, and the other thing, I think it was in the spring. Pam Kastner spoke with a teacher, and I'm blanking on her name right now. And she completely reorganized their book room. And I hate waste and throwing away books.
Yeah.
But what she did was go through those leveled texts and reorganize them into theme bins, and
Yeah.
discovering if there was that decodability or controlled text manner to it. And so that is something, yes, it takes time, but if you have a couple teachers doing it over a weekend, and I know, yes, that's your personal time, but it's a way to use things, reuse things in an appropriate manner, because there's some great ideas and activities in those books, but they're not best for those beginning readers to read independently.
Right. We did that. We've done that too, because we have, one of my schools has probably 10 vertical file cabinets of guided reading books, leveled books. And so I haven't been through all of them yet, because you're right, it does take a lot of time, but I totally dig it. Like, this is my thing. I just need some time to do it. But I pulled out any of the decodables. There are a few that could be considered decodable, maybe not the best, but there are enough parts of it that if I'm working on short A, most of the words have short A in it, something like that. So I pulled out to repurpose any of those that were decodable and organize them by skill. And that's my decodable book bin box, or file cabinet.
Mhm.
And the rest of them will be organized by theme or content or topic, because we can still use those leveled readers for comprehension, and we can use those for building knowledge and vocabulary. And even I can give it to my student who I think, you've been doing pretty well with the decodables, with your training wheels. Let's see what you can do in an uncontrolled text. So I can give that to them. But it's not what I'm going to use to teach them how to decode. It's not what I'm going to use to practice that skill that we just learned. That's what decodables are. And so the principal was talking to me about it, and I was telling her how I was got it organized and whatever. And she said, well, some of these books that don't have a purpose anymore, the ones that just have like, I like a hippopotamus with the picture above it, right?
Collaging.
Yeah. So I was like, those don't really belong anywhere. She's like, but kindergartners learn how to read using these. And I said, no, they don't. So we went through the whole thing, and she's like, I just can't get rid of them. I said, well, whatever you do, they do not go in this decodable book file cabinet. They do not go there at all. Do what you want, but not there. And she was raised in the Mari Clay and, whole language, where if you put them in with books, they're going to learn how to read and love it. And so she's on her own journey of learning, and she's very supportive of the structured literacy movement, but her knowledge just hasn't caught up yet. It will. But anyway, that was a little tangent, but we try to repurpose those books too, because there are great uses for them. Vocabulary, building knowledge, listening comprehension.
That's when you can use those sticky notes to cover up the words and get the kids to write their own stories.
Yeah.
Not say, what word do you think belongs here? Let's make up the story about this picture. And that can be a comprehension building, a writing exercise. And there are so many great discussions that can be had with those books. They're just not to be purposed to teach children to read.
Correct. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Shelley. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope to have more in the future.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on all three of these podcasts, and it's been fun to get to talk shop. So thanks for having me.